Nitin, are we live?
Okay, we are live now. Okay,
Okay, fine.
that's all to you. Bye bye.
All right. So, welcome everybody. We are Advanced Orthopedics. We are a group of 4 orthopedic surgeons who've come together to form a specialized orthopedic group. And our objective to hold these virtual clinics uh, for you is to have a better understanding and a better communication between us orthopedic surgeons and you as physiotherapists, physicians, athletes, and even and even coaches, so that we are able to share our clinical experiences with you, and in exchange also learn a lot from you guys. So we are going to have this short clinical discussion about a patient that I've seen a few days ago, and it's mainly about a combination of problems of the neck and the shoulder which come together, and if we forget to address one or the other, the patient is the one who suffers. So we shouldn't miss a few clinical signs and treat our patients appropriately. So with that said, we are going to hold these clinics, these virtual clinics, regularly now for every Sunday is what our objective is, to have a combined learning experience from each other. And we are planning to make this kind of a close group of interested people so that we have a communication about our cases. For this to happen, as many of you have already signed up, we need to, you guys need to come to our website, which is advancedorthopedics.in. You will see a button which is called membership. It's free, and this educational program is completely free. It's unsponsored, and it's only in the interest of learning that we are doing this. So go to the website, click on the membership link, and then you will receive an invitation soon in our WhatsApp group, and that's where we will be posting these clinics regularly. Following which, if you need to contact us, our phone numbers are already on that group. So you are welcome to connect with us for any of your personal cases or any discussions that you like in the future. And you can communicate with us directly in that way. So without much ado, let's start with today's case discussion. So patient came to me is a 40-year-old gentleman presenting to me with pain in his right shoulder, along with stiffness of his neck and pain around the neck. He complains of the since 3 months and without any sort of an injury that happened to him. This has been progressively increasing for him, and it's become a little chronic. It is associated with restriction of neck movements, radiation down the arm. There is tingling numbness in his fingers and his hand. There is stiffness in his shoulder, especially in external rotation where he cannot move his arm outwards. There is shoulder pain and there is shoulder weakness. So today I am joined with my colleague, Dr. Priyank Patel, who's a spine surgeon. And a lot of times when we have these patients who complain of neck pain along with shoulder pain, or the patients who present to me as being a shoulder specialist, I always want to get a spine surgeon's referral or an understanding as to whether the neck problems or the spine problems predominate and are causing shoulder problems, or it's the other way around. And that's the clinical confusion that most of us in clinical practice face. And that's what our objective today is, to get to the crux of the matter there. So I have I had created a questionnaire about this case, and I had sent a few questions out. And thanks to a great response, a lot of you people took interest, and you've answered my question. And this is the poll result. So the first question was that this patient with pain in the shoulder and neck with radiation, what symptom or clinical sign would you think is more pointing towards a cervical spine pathology? And about 40, I got an equivalent response of 44% said it's radiation that down the arm that points towards a clinically predominant cervical spine pathology, and 44% said it's tingling numbness. So at this juncture, I would like to pose this question to my dear friend, Dr. Priyank Patel, and like to have his inputs in terms of what do you think should be the answer?
Yeah. So, hi Chintan, can you hear me well?
Yeah, your voice is quite clear, but it's breaking.
We have actually had a lot of such interactions where on phone we have discussed such cases. It is more common than uncommon that patients with spine have shoulder problems and with shoulder have some kind of a spine problem. As clinicians, my outlook is primarily to see if majority is a shoulder issue or majority is a spine issue. So in that thing, the question that you posted here is what is more towards the spine rather than, but more of tingling and numbness. A lot of things which I'm eventually going to ask you, but it is more of the tingling and numbness, which overtly tells you that it is a nerve in question, and hence you start pointing out that okay, maybe it is coming from the spine. If just 1 second.
Priyank,
I got a message that I've got a message that
your voice wasn't clear. If you could just come again.
Yeah, I've just reset my internet a little bit more. So yeah, me and Dr. Chintan, we have had a lot of such patients, and the primary target is from the neck area or not. Now, okay, I think Chintan, you just take over for a minute. Let me just set my internet right a little bit.
So we'll come back to this question and get Priyank's opinion on this. But my second question then, which I will take over for, is the same patient having shoulder pain, and what would be the clinical sign which tells me that it is a shoulder pathology as well? Now, most of you did get it right. It is restriction in shoulder movements because that is specific towards the shoulder. It is very rare for a patient with a cervical spine pathology that would have a restriction in shoulder movements. Unless and until obviously that there is a significant nerve compression causing deltoid wasting, or there is a nerve compression causing involvement of the suprascapular nerve involving the supra and infraspinatus, that would involve a restriction in active range of motion. But what we are talking about here is a restriction in passive range of motion. So if there is any restriction in passive range of motion, it points more towards capsular pathology or points more towards the shoulder related problem. And if Priyank has set his internet up.
Yeah, I think my internet is hopefully better. Okay, fine. So usually how I approach with it is I try to dig a bit more deeper into the history as to what started first. Did they start complaining of pain? Typically if it is a spine problem, the history will more be like pain in the neck area, in the trapezius area, in the middle back, interscapular area. Usually these pain starts coming towards the end of the day, and slowly you start noticing that the intensity and frequency of these pains start increasing, and there is one time when they really have a knock neck with a spasm on one side. Okay, and this is where they really present to me or you or any other clinician, because the on and off pain has suddenly become very bad. And when they come to us, they are anyways, there is a lot of shoulder issues, there's a lot of neck issues. Their complaint is that they have pain in this area. Now this area could be either coming from the shoulder or from the neck. Yeah, so here what I do is I try to dig a little more in the history. So if the history has started with infrequent pains in the neck, which has later on progressed to the shoulder, I first start thinking that okay, maybe it's coming from the spine area. The other thing that I would like to know is the type of pain. The pain which is here, is it radiating down? And if it is radiating down, I ask if it is above elbow or below elbow. When it is below elbow pain, it is unlikely that it is going to come from the shoulder. And I want you to correct me if I am wrong, but I always feel that if the pain is going right up till the forearm, it's mostly radiating pain from the spine. And along with this radiating pain, very important is the tingling and numbness if they are complaining of, because tingling and numbness tilts the way towards the spine problem. the next thing that I would want to also know from them is, along with the pain, is there a restriction in their motion, either of the neck or of the shoulder? So like your second question which you had put forth is, if the patient starts having restriction of shoulder, then you have to also think that there might be a shoulder problem. So I had a couple of questions for you. One here is it possible that as a result of neck pain, because the patient starts, probably using his trapezius or his one part of the body less, can they get secondary stiffness of the shoulder?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And it's quite common. That happens quite significantly because once the patient has a trapezius spasm or trapezius tightness, automatically he is unable to move his shoulder. Every time he uses his arm, his trapezius kind of stretches and pulls, and that aggravates his trapezius pain. And a lot of times these patients can present to you as frozen shoulders, and if they're, and sometimes with a locked neck, they will wince in pain every time, if you possibly try to move their arm as well. And if this progresses for a while, then they can have a condition leading to a secondary frozen shoulder. So that's quite possible. And we will discuss in the following imaging that the patient that presented to me had a similar kind of a complaint.
Correct,
Now,
because I have had patients who primarily are shoulder pathology, but they
right,
never came to me for a shoulder problem. They came to me
exactly,
saying that they have a neck issue, and
exactly,
eventually I realized that neck is just a spondylotic pain, but that
right.
person has got
Primary
a
pathology is on the shoulder.
costly frozen shoulder.
Correct. So this
But
is
they
the
really didn't bother because there was no pain. So I
correct.
also wanted to know, yeah, so I wanted to know from you as to how would you proceed with the examination of shoulders, those subtle telltale signs that you want probably us to see to completely rule out a shoulder problem.
Correct. So this is where the patients have a problem choosing between me and Priyank, and often they end up seeing the both of us. And uh, for the shoulder, the clinic, when the patient presents to me clinically examining him is extremely important. The history can be vague. Sometimes they can say that I had no injury, I had no problems, I never did any gym activities, and I got this pain. According to me, digging down in the history, I find it is mainly a lot based on how the patient's posture was. So if they have a wrong sleeping posture, that's what I think predominantly causes this type of a problem, where there is stiffness in the neck and then progresses secondarily either to the shoulder. And sometimes it could be the other way around, so impingement of the shoulder. So patients who have a habit of sleeping with their arm on top like this and leaning on one side, or if the patients use a very small pillow and have a habit of sleeping on the side, that kind of pinches their nerves and causes a secondary cervical related problem, or and it can cause a shoulder related impingement with that extended overhead activity all through the night. So that's what points me towards, a patient having both these problems in combination. It predominantly leans towards something degenerative or postural, which is causing this type of a symptom. Clinical signs, when I examine the patient, what I look for is tenderness. So if this patient has tenderness in the anterior biceps, so in the long head of the biceps, that's what kind of confirms to me that this will be a shoulder related problem, and it may not be as much a neck related or a cervical spine related problem. Also doing a tenderness check at the acromioclavicular joint, so the AC joint tenderness, that it as well points towards a shoulder related primary pathology. Restriction on range of motion, especially external rotation. So if the external rotation going outwards is stiff, that is what points me towards thinking that this patient has a frozen shoulder. It is immaterial if the patient cannot do forward flexion or abduction, because even impingement presents with limited range of motion in abduction, and that is not a frozen shoulder. And patients with rotator cuff injuries or tears can also present with limited forward flexion and limited abduction, but their external rotation typically will be good. So if external rotation predominantly is stiff, is what points me towards thinking that this patient will have a frozen shoulder, because the remaining range of motion can be limited in either of the shoulder pathologies. Similarly, then a question to you from me is, how can I improve my understanding of the cervical spine in terms of how do I check for these simple tests that you do in your daily clinical practice to rule out a cervical disc? What are those tests that you do?
Okay. So, so technically, shoulder is way more fancier when it comes to examination. Spine really does not have a lot of examination that you need to do, but there are just two basic things. If you just follow them, you will know if it's a radicular pain coming from the spine or not. So one, you have to see for the range of motion up and down and left and right.
Correct.
Invariably, if a person is having pain in this side, you might see that the rotation maybe on one side is restricted and the other side is full. Okay. So one is you have to see their active range of motion. And if there is restriction of the range of motion, then you start thinking that the patient has got some paraspinal spasm. A paraspinal spasm will most commonly be seen in a severe discal pathology. So in a non-specific neck pain because of muscular pain, they'll have pain, but the range of motion and all is going to be fine. But if there's restriction of motion, then you have to be suspicious that there is a spasm, which means that either there is some kind of a discal injury or a slip disc, or it could be something more dangerous like infection or something. But that's a very rare percentage. It's most commonly because of a discal pathology. The other thing that you do is you after that take over and do something called as a Sperling's maneuver. Okay, so it's basically doing the same thing. You do the range of motion, but here you have to do the range of motion on one side, and then you have to do extension or flexion of the neck. So on either side, you do a passive extension or flexion of the neck and ask the patient if the pain that is there in the hand, is the pain going up or is the pain going down. A lot of times if there is impingement of the nerve, you will see that in one particular position the pain increases, and when you actually reverse the position, the pain goes down. Because what happens is by doing that maneuver, you are essentially opening up and closing the foramen. So when you close the foramen, the radicular pain will present itself, and when you open it, it will get relieved. So then you think that okay, there's a radicular pain that is there. So that's basically what you have to see to differentiate the type of pain. Of course, once that is done, there are other examination things like neurological and sensory examination that you want to do, which probably at the end of our examination, I'll quickly brush up as to how to do those bit. Chintan, I had one question for you. You said that in frozen shoulder, of course, all this external rotation and all, and I've also a lot of times seen that patients with frozen shoulder have a concomitant neck issues also. But is it very common with the other conditions also, like rotator cuff injury, and even those patients you see a lot of times spine problem?
So not very commonly, unless and until they are degenerative problems. So a degenerative rotator cuff tear patient is usually a patient who is beyond, let's say, 60 years of age. And because of the degeneration in the cuff, they present with a weakness in abduction and rotator cuff issues. And obviously, because of the degeneration, there will be degeneration in the entire body. So even if you examine their knees, they will have some sort of degeneration.
Correct.
So similarly, they would have some sort of cervical spondylotic issues or degenerative changes in the spine. So those patients, you need to do a detailed neurological examination as well, a little bit in terms of checking their hypoesthesia, where they do they have any sensation differences, and whether that clinical symptom is really troubling them. So those will be the patient who you need to choose in terms of what you need to treat them for. So even if they have some sensation differences and they do not complain of any radicular pain, they do not complain of much tingling numbness, or that is not a troubling symptom for them, then I think that symptom should take secondary precedence to their shoulder weakness, and that should be treated. So the other pathologies, you need to really kind of choose what you want to treat first or what you have to treat first, depending upon the patient's symptom.
So are there any shoulder condition where the sensory part gets affected?
So only very rare conditions where the brachial plexus is involved. Some conditions like Parsonage-Turner syndromes, where there is an idiopathic brachial plexopathy or plexitis, in which if the sensory part of the plexus is affected, then you may feel some changes. Other neurological conditions like multiple sclerosis or conditions like that are demyelinating neurological conditions that can affect causing sensory differences. But most of the brachial plexus problem usually present to us with a motor deficit or a motor related problem.
Correct.
You would clearly see a deficiency or a wasting of a particular group of muscle, and that will point you towards thinking of something neurological in that patient.
Correct.
But otherwise, rarely, it is quite rare to see shoulder related pathology presenting with you know, a tingling numbness or
Correct.
symptom like that, or neurological symptom. Now, yeah, that's excellent. So I think we have exceeded our time for this part of the talk. So I'll just quickly summarize. So it's very important when you examine your patient who has both a shoulder related problem and a spine related problem to dig into the history quite deep. Ask them why it happened, whether there was an injury or not. If no injury, then it could be degenerative, and you should think about what should take precedence, or what is the symptom that is more troubling to the patient, and who you need to treat. Treatment we will come to later, but clinical examination wise, please do a Sperling sign in these patients. Do examine their sensation if they have any tingling numbness which is causing hypoesthesia, to kind of suspect a cervical spine problem as well. And shoulder wise, it's quite simple. So just do your passive external rotation. If there is no restriction, start thinking about a rotator cuff pathology or something else. So examination should be quite fast if for shoulder and neck. It's not too difficult. Just checking the patient's neck movements, doing a quick Sperling sign, checking for hypoesthesia, and for shoulder, just external rotation and shoulder abduction weakness or not. And that's the end of the clinical examination. So for a clinician, it should not take more than 45 seconds to get this patient diagnosed quickly. And if the patient needs, then further referrals. So this is our clinical presentation. Now progressing on to the next part, which we will be going to investigations. So Priyanka, I had a quick question for you. If you what type of X-ray should you really advise this patient in terms of getting a understanding about the cervical spine pathology?
Correct. So theoretically, if you start thinking, then there will be a lot of things that you want to do. But practically, it is either an X-ray or an MRI. If a patient is having a radicular symptom, then I would prefer to do an MRI. And in that case, I really don't ask for an X-ray, because it's not going to make us wiser. All right. Because the MRI is going to tell you the alignment, it will tell you the discal pathology, everything. A person who's having purely axial symptoms, only neck pain, not a lot of radiculopathy, which probably maybe he's having more of a shoulder issue with a little bit of neck pain. There we could just do a screening X-ray. In that case, just a AP lateral static films are good enough. We'll get some idea from there. The downside of an X-ray is that the people who come to us, invariably everybody is going to have a degenerative X-ray. So it does not really make you wiser. But yeah, if you are suspecting a 5-6 disc, then on an X-ray, you should be able to see decreased disc space between 5 and 6, and you should be able to see an osteophyte, those things.
Great. So it doesn't really add much value in your clinical examination takes precedence over X-ray. Okay. So similarly for me in the shoulder, there are only a couple of conditions that can present to you, which will help you, which the X-ray will help you to get this diagnosed. Some patients sometimes present to you with an acute shoulder pain, like they've never experienced before. So if it's on the left side, obviously the first thing that physician should think of is a heart attack or heart-related pathology. And if the ECGs and everything are clear, that's when I see the patient that, see why is this shoulder hurting. And on an X-ray, if what I am looking for in this patient who has a acute sudden increase in sudden severe shoulder pain without any injury, or a trivial injury like he was playing table tennis or something and he had this sudden acute severe shoulder pain, and that points me towards looking for a calcific tendinitis. So calcific tendinitis will present with an acute shoulder pain, with stiffness in the neck, radiation down the arm, all the typical symptoms that you will find in a large cervical disc. So physicians often do get confused whether this is a acute cervical disc related spine problem or is it a calcific tendinitis. And in a simple shoulder X-ray, a true AP shoulder X-ray and an axillary lateral will you will be able to locate those calcifications, and that's the end of it. You don't really need an MRI secondary if you find that calcific body. Now, Priyank,
So when would you do an MRI? Because I've heard you say that a lot of times shoulder the MRI is over diagnostic. So what are the conditions where you would want to get an MRI done?
right. So when the patient presents to me with a weak shoulder, whether it's weakness and which is predominant or which is pronounced on one side as compared to the other. So if the affected side, the right side, has significant weakness as compared to the left, then I start thinking about a rotator cuff pathology, may it be degenerative, traumatic, or whatever. And that is the patient I want to see. What is the extent of the tear? Do I need to intervene in that patient or not?
Okay.
The second thing is patients who have a chronic shoulder stiffness. So patients who are, let's say, more than 60 years of age, if that patient on an X-ray does not have any arthritis, which arthritis is quite common in the shoulder as well, and usually in patients who have stiff shoulders beyond 60, we want to get an X-ray to rule out arthritis, to rule out a stiff shoulder because of an arthritic joint. But if the joint is not arthritic, that's when I want to see if there is any bicipital problem, so biceps tendinopathy, whether there is any subluxation of the biceps, or whether there is any whether there is evidence of or radiological evidence of a frozen shoulder, adhesive capsulitis. Sometimes adhesive capsulitis is secondary to a rotator cuff tear as well in patients who have a lot of postural issue and chronic problems. So these patients who want to sleep or say that they were aggravated with activities over their head and then their shoulders started becoming stiff. Then secondary frozen shoulders after rotator cuff injuries can also present, and that's what I want to rule out, whether it is just a frozen shoulder or is it secondary to a rotator cuff injury. Because in the acute stage of a frozen shoulder, even that patient will present to me with a weak shoulder. So because of the pain, the patient will not be able to lift weight, and that's the patient I also want to rule out a rotator cuff injury before I want to send them for some sort of exercises or physiotherapy.
So here you immediately do an MRI, or you try conservative for some days
Yeah,
and
so
then reassess.
Yeah, so in the ideal situation, I do want to get my clinical diagnosis correct. Then I want to send them for whatever therapeutic modalities. But obviously, for cost constraints, and sometimes patients do ask for medicines first in our Indian settings. So we do treat them for a week or so with anti-inflammatories, see if they're responding better. Sometimes, if it is a spine-related problem or a spasm-related problem, then those spasms do pass off in a week's time, and then if they're still not improving, that's the patient I want to get an MRI for. So now the same question
So
to you,
yeah,
Priya.
just one more. We also have USG that we can do. How much do you feel? What's your opinion? Can USG replace an
Take over.
MRI or
Right,
not really?
right. In great hands. So in good hands, people who are very good at locating rotator cuff tears or radiologically, and there are very good radiologists in my area where I practice. So if I can send them to that radiologist who's great at it and whose reports I have been seeing, whose sonography reports I have been seeing, and they are responding or corresponding to my clinical finding, that I would trust, and I would believe that if there is no tear or is there a tear. But on an average, on general, so if you get a radiology or a USG report from anywhere, and that I really can't believe that USG report, because there's a lot of inter-observer dependency and variation. So I would prefer an MRI to look at myself rather than trust somebody else's USG findings.
Okay, got it. One question we have had: how much are you happy if suppose I've done an MRI of the spine and I suspect somewhere in the shoulder and I get a shoulder screening done? Are you happy with a shoulder screening or it's useless?
So shoulder screening, what I want to see in a shoulder screening is at least I want to get all the coronal cuts. I don't really care about sagittal cuts or axial cuts as much if I'm not suspecting a labrum pathology, in which axial cuts would be preferable. But in general, I would at least want to see more coronal images rather than any other sort of images.
Do the radiologists usually do that? Like if I write MRI with shoulder screening, would they do what you want, or they just do one film and send it
So
across?
usually the screening images of the shoulder, they do look at all the images. If they find the pathology, that's what they print. So even if I prescribe a cervical spine screening, they would want to they do a proper cervical spine MRI, and then they would kind of
Just give
see if
that
there
film.
is just the film reporting is different.
Because that's one question which came from one of our attendees is, are you happy, can we do the screening at the same time?
Correct.
So
Yeah, that can be done. And in fact, I would advise that to my patients. So most of my patients who present like this with neck related problem with tingling numbness is I want to get a cervical spine screening as well. And
Okay.
then if there is any finding there, then I proceed on. I think we should step
Yeah.
it up a little bit. So this was my patient that I was talking about who presented to me. So a cervical, he had a small cervical disc like this, which was compressing a little, which contributed to his tingling numbness. Now he had no weakness in the upper limb. He had no myelopathic changes as the spine, and he had no problems walking and in gait or anything like that. And he said that over a period of time with therapy that numbness had subsided. So how seriously would you really take this type of spine finding, Priyank? Or what do you want to do for this patient?
So this is a very typical MRI. Like if I get all of our MRI done like this, you will see exactly a picture like this. It's a degenerative spine, multiple level discs are degenerated, except one at one place, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. At 6, 7, you can see a disc bulge. Now, although this it's a very good representative spine screening film, which is showing that the cord has got no compression. So one thing is there that this patient is safe to start treatment for the spine or shoulder without us really worrying about causing any myelopathy. The only thing is, because there's a significant disc bulge, I would want to, if suppose the patient is clinically giving history of tingling numbness in the hands, and also is either the spurling is coming positive, or just because of the history, I would uh, attribute that to the spine. I would see the axial cut at that area and see how much is the foraminal stenosis.
Right.
But this MRI could be very well of a person with only neck pain without any radicular pain, because if you see, there is enough room for the cord.
Correct. Okay. So it's the same patient who had also had shoulder stiffness. Here, as we see, this patient had a thickening of the inferior glenohumeral ligament, which is an MRI finding of him having a frozen shoulder. There was really a very little amount of degeneration in his shoulder. It's minimal. There is no biceps or labrum pathology, or so no slap tearing or anything like that over there. You can call this a questionable interstitial tear. He had no history of injury or trauma, so I would not really want to think about this on a serious basis of me wanting to intervene in this patient to repair that tear. There was a little bit of degeneration on his AC joint, so acromioclavicular joint there. So this is typically what you would see in a patient who has an MRI for a frozen shoulder. So this is a typical finding, and that's what we see. Secondarily, as I said before, that when I palpated that patient's biceps, he had pain, and that is confirmed by the MRI finding where there is effusion or synovitis around the long end of the biceps, where there is some effusion there. So this patient was more of predominantly a patient of a shoulder who had shoulder problems with an associated minor spine related problem. So that's what I want to drive home the message over here, is that patients, even if you get a spine screening done, they will have some sort of degeneration, but you need to dig deep into the clinical history about what is really troubling the patient. If it's the anterior shoulder pain which is troubling, if the restriction in shoulder movement is the troubling factor, and it is contributed by your findings or confirmed by the MRI findings, you need to focus more on the shoulder rather than the spine. But it doesn't go to say, as Dr. Priyank said, that this cannot get worse. It can get worse. So we need to focus as a preventive measure. We need to do some neck related treatments as well, so that this does not progress onto a massive disc with which later may progress onto myelopathy and become chronic. So more shoulder, less spine. So now
So
let's Priyank, sorry.
yeah. No. So a lot of times, Chintan, I'm sure you must have noticed, and often the patients have had several treatments before they really come to us, right? I would want to ask you couple of the things that you are going to see on a MRI. Okay, one thing on an MRI and two things which on one thing on MRI, one thing on history, and one thing on examination, which you would, if suppose a patient has, you would want to first see the patient before you even treat anything, you know. And I will start from spine. Like as far as spine is concerned, if someone is having a history of severe numbness in the hand along with weakness, I would want to see the patient first before treating it. On examination, if there is power which is less than 3 by 5, or if there are brisk reflexes, any myelopathy signs, I would want to see the patient before any treatment is done. And
Right.
third is on a MRI, if I see cord compression,
Right.
so where there is no CSF around the cord. So these three things if are there, I would recommend everybody that before even touching the patient, get a proper evaluation done, because these are the red flags. So can you tell something like this similar for the shoulder?
Right. So I would just want to pass a note there. Nowadays, with telemedicine becoming very common, it's normal to, I mean, it's fine that you do a telemedicine consult. But these red flag signs are extremely important. Please do not neglect them. These patients will need clinical examination. And as you see, that clinical examination always and always takes precedence in terms of how you treat your patients. Do not depend upon radiological findings. They will often mislead you towards treating the patient possibly in a wrong manner, and your patients will not respond to it. So for the shoulder, for patients who do not have too much pain, that they say that I have been having restriction in shoulder movements, but I am not very painful, and those patients are the ones we can manage, remotely. We can prescribe medications, prescribe exercises, or something like that. If the patient is not very painful, they do not have much weakness. However, patients who do have a lot of shoulder pain, so sudden severe shoulder pain, as I said, those patients we need to think about calcific tendinopathy or tendinitis. And those are the ones that I need to see or get an X ray or an imaging to get that diagnosed. The second is a patient who has weakness. So, a patient who tells you that I am unable to lift my arm, I am able to lift it up with the other hand, but moment I let it go, I'm not able to hold it, it drops. So this type of a patient who has a drop arm sign, that patient points towards having a rotator cuff pathology. And a rotator cuff pathology needs to be seen and diagnosed correctly to manage it and not allow it to progress to a chronic stage. However, as in the spine, there is very rarely, until and unless it's a fracture situation where there is a significant injury or a shoulder dislocation or an acute episode like that where I need to see the patient to examine. If there is no history of injury, very rarely does a shoulder patient need immediate attention like in the spine. Because in the spine, they can worsen and have chronic problems later. In the shoulder, not so much. We can manage them even 15 days later or a month later. Priyank, does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. So now let's finally get to the last part, and I don't think we should take much time now. What would be the difference with your prescription in this patient? So for me, for my patient who I just presented, who had minor cervical problems with a little bit of tingling numbness, telling me that he's getting better. Only thing apart from some anti-inflammatories or paracetamol pain medication, which I commonly and would recommend others also to prescribe, because NSAIDs, patients tend to take them for a longer duration of time, and with comorbidities like diabetes, they can have increase in their creatinine levels, and we do not want that to happen, and which has happened with a lot of orthopedic surgeons as well. So medication wise, apart from paracetamol and some muscle relaxants, I would like to add a pregabalin or a gabapentin or a medication like that to help with the nerve related pathology. Priyank, would you second that? What would be different in your prescription?
So yeah, so I think the prescription wise, it's nearly the same. except two things. One is pregabalin. See, most of these patients are geriatric patients, so I am a little. What happens is derivatives have a undesirable effect. It causes drowsiness.
Correct.
And it also causes next day groggy sensations.
Correct.
So unless the pain is very bad, I refrain from giving the medicines. And if I have to give the medicines, I counsel them that they are going to feel drugged, they are going to feel drowsy, so they have to take care and not panic because of the pain. The other thing is, sometimes these old patients at night when they go for peeing, if they are drowsy and dizzy, sometimes they can have falls. So they need to be aware about that. Along with this, vitamin D and vitamin B12 supplements I usually give. There was also a question from one of the attendees: is before an MRI B12 and tingling numbness? So here I would say that B12 is a supporting medication. It is not something that is used for treatment of tingling numbness and everything. Of course, if a person has got generalized tingling numbness, a vegetarian, poor diet, then yeah, of course, B12 might be a contributory factor, and that is what might be causing the tingling numbness. But it's unlikely that a single dermatomal involvement and a single area radicular pain can be because of a B12 deficiency. Right. So that. One other question is, I usually don't give ointments to any patients, but do you give them?
Yeah, I find that local application of ointments do help soothe muscle spasms and muscle relax, for help at least psychologically to patients, because they've been used to using that for any sort of muscle pain. So I do not refrain from giving it to them. I do advise them a little bit of light massage as well. I think that helps to relax their muscles too.
One of the reasons why I don't give ointments is because I ask them a lot of hot and cold compresses. Correct. Like for the neck area, I tell them to do hot compressing, correct, alternating with cold packs. And correct, for shoulder, I tell them to just do cold packs. Correct. I really don't know how the medications are going. Like I've had some patients after applying gels, they have done hot compresses and they have developed blisters and redness and everything. That's right, why I don't want to mix all of that up, and that's why I just don't give the ointment.
Correct. So this is a very common question that a lot of patients ask me. I mean, where do you put ice and where do you put warm? And as you correctly explained, is in the shoulder because of the bicipital tendinitis, there is some sort of inflammatory problem. So ice application would help there. Mainly in the neck, it's a secondary nerve pinch causing a muscle spasm, which help. And so muscle spasm problems help with warm water or warm compression, so to relax that muscle spasm. So that's good. So now, would you send these patients for physiotherapy, and what sort of expectations do you have from the therapist? What would be your plan in terms of a minor disc related problem with a little bit of tingling numbness and those types of problems? How would you want your patient to progress in terms of therapy?
So here the start of exercise is dependent on their muscle spasm. If the patient has got no muscle spasm without a muscle relaxant, means the patient is ready for doing exercises. All right. And once the exercises are advised, I tell them to start with isometric exercises. I talk to the therapist and we discuss on initially isometric neck and isometric shoulder and just postural correction. Along with if there is radiculopathy, chin tucks are added. And once the patient is comfortable after start doing the advanced exercises where we start range of motion exercises, resistance isometric exercise. And once a patient has started developing radiculopathy, traction is contraindicated, especially when you don't have an MRI. Because if it is because of an annular tear, the radiculopathy, if it is because of an annular tear, by giving traction, you might convert it into a full-blown slip disc. So just in general, traction is something that is disregarded now. But someone with chronic mechanical neck pain, where you absolutely know there is no neural element, you can choose to give traction. That's completely your choice. Just that I feel that patient has a lot to lose more. So radiculopathy patients, no traction and only isometrics till the spasms go away. Lot of times the pain is so much that we need to do something to relieve the pain. So local icing and modalities can help. But if someone, I personally, again, in an acute case with spasms, I don't like modalities. Chronic patients, you give modalities for pain management is fine, because I actually like those spasms because they're protecting you from doing some damage to your neck. If at all someone is doing modalities, when modalities are giving, please don't do any exercises. Let the patient be completely spasm free when you actually want to start the exercises. So that's my advice always as far as the physiotherapy is concerned.
So what patient would you want to really put them on a cervical collar or an immobilization?
So cervical collar in my book is only and only for correcting your posture. So the role of cervical collar comes more when they start working, so that they put the collar and they decide how they have to move around. There are certain patients where you want to give them bed rest, especially someone with an acute disc. Okay. So in acute disc patient, if the patient is not just willing for rest for whatever reason, they have to go something. So those patients are beneficial to wear a collar. The
Where
third
you
type
kind of
is
expect that disc to progress.
no. So
It's not
usually
like
when you want to put someone on bed rest, when there is an acute prolapse intervertebral disc and the patient is not willing for rest, in a neck you can put a collar so that at least the neck movement goes away.
correct.
The third time is when you're traveling. So when you're in your chronic phase, you're recovering from your injury, you're traveling, and you're traveling especially in a way that you yourself don't drive, you're sitting back. Okay. See, when you're driving, you don't need a collar, but when you're sitting back, you have a habit of not, dozing off, going to sleep.
Right.
At that time, you can have those jerks. So these are the three places where collars are required.
Perfect. So in terms of physiotherapy for me, if speaking about this patient who had a stiff shoulder, he needs range of motion exercises. Now, as you saw, he had a little bit of a rotator cuff, minor interstitial related problem. So that I do not want them to at least do overhead abductions to the side. That's what can reproduce the impingement. So apart from the abduction, all the range of motion exercises can be initiated. So external rotation, sleeper stretches, forward flexion, wall climbing, and behind back with the towel. So those are the four main exercises which I want my patient to kind of do, and I explain them to them about these exercises.
Suppose these patients have a partial tear, which we don't know about because we have not done an MRI.
Correct.
These exercises are still okay, or it could worsen the problem?
Right. So exactly speaking about this patient, so this patient has a small partial tear with an adhesive capsulitis, which is questionable, and when the patient doesn't have any associated diabetes or anything like that, points towards a secondary adhesive capsulitis secondary to a small rotator cuff injury. It's kind of like a neck muscle spasm with a acute pinch in the disc or an acute pinch in the nerve causing a secondary muscle spasm. So here in the shoulder, it's the same thing. It's like a spasm of the capsule. So the capsule kind of becomes stiff and thick, and secondarily then it becomes tight and stiff. And that is what is an acute full bone frozen shoulder. So again, I like those types of stiff shoulders who have associated uh, rotator cuff tears, because it's kind of a God-given blessing to rest the shoulder to allow that small tear to heal. And we do not prefer to intervene in those patients at that stage when they are stiff, which have very small injuries. We want to treat them conservatively for 3 months. So this patient as well. So 3 to 4 months, I want him to do some stretching exercises. The only exercise which can aggravate that tear is an abduction. So that's going to reproduce the impingement and will cause some sort of problem.
Okay.
External rotation to the side, a little bit of sleeper stretches within the patient's pain range. So obviously in the first initial months, the patient will have pain because of the stretching of the inflamed capsule. And a frozen shoulder, as everybody knows, typically does take a lot of time to improve because it goes through phases, right? So initial phase is painful, then it's the frozen stage, and then the thawing stage. So anywhere up to 2 years it can take for this patient to improve. So the initial phase, we need to focus on healing of the small rotator cuff injury. If the patient is apprehensive and anxious, we need to get, follow it up with an MRI 3 months later and see what's happened to that tear. So most of these tears can heal on their own. And at 3 months, if the tear has healed, then we know that the patient is progressing. This patient will also tell you that my pain levels have gone down. I don't have much pain now. It's only the stiffness that I have to recover. So that tells you that now it's only the frozen shoulder that needs to recover. And then we aggressively push that patient towards more aggressive range of motion exercises.
And what modalities would you use, like if for this pain relief for shoulder, if I have to write, That
So modalities wise, in the sense, I
like
would.
IFTs, ultrasound. There are so many modalities which physiotherapists use to help with, healing and also with relieving the symptoms.
So
So for shoulder, any particular modality you like or dislike?
So for the first thing is, I don't think any modality really contributes towards healing. It is, the healing happens on its own with the natural blood supply through the bone and through the bursa or whatever. But I have not seen any evidence that an ultrasound improves healing of the rotator cuff or an IFT improves healing of the rotator cuff. If that were the case, we would all surgeons be using it. But I don't find that there is any evidence for that. So I wouldn't say that they contribute towards healing. I guess, I mean, all of those modalities would improve or contribute towards relieving muscle spasms. So these patients, because of the stiffness in the capsule, secondarily they have tightness of the pectorals, they have tightness of the infraspinatus, the tightness of the trapezius. So all these modalities would be helpful in terms of relieving the patient's symptoms that way. In general, I don't prescribe myself in terms of what modalities they should use. The therapist who is treating the patient, if they find that manual therapy or if the patient is not progressing or something, and if modalities are helping that patient, then they are obviously welcome to use them. So only thing, one word of caution, especially with diabetic patients, is with those heat packs or IFT machines or something, it's causing some heat generation on the patient's skin. So the diabetic patients especially are neurologically compromised. They have peripheral neuropathies. And if those heat packs are left on for too long, or the IFT machines is left on for too long, I've seen patients who are developing a lot of blisters. So I kind of want to shy away from from prescribing these modalities to my patients. Now,
Okay.
Priyank,
I think we should. Huh. Yeah. Ask me.
yeah, you were saying something like
No, I
what?
was like, we are now running short of time, so we should wrap up with our treatment plan. There are some questions which the delegates have put for you. If you could go through them. You were asking me something when I cut you off.
Right. So until you answer my next question, I'll just go through those and I'll try and answer them. So when do you think would you suggest a surgical intervention with for a patient with a cervical spine related problem?
So the
At least in this
indications are,
patient,
yeah.
at least in this patient.
Yeah. So in this particular patient, I don't think so any spine intervention is going to be needed. But broadly, if a patient has got myelopathy because of a compression, he needs surgery. If the patient has got a neurological deficit, which is more than 3/5, okay, that is very important. Then he needs surgery because there is evidence which shows that they will do better with surgical management than with conservative management. Someone with a neurology in 4/5 or 3+/5 range can very well be conservatively managed. The next indication for surgery is, of course, a failure of conservative treatment, and surgery is only and only if there is a neurological involvement. If it is a neck pain only, there is no surgery for that. You can at best give them facet blocks to relieve them of their pain.
Right. Okay. Great. So I have gotten a question, and this is a good learning point for me as well, and that's why I think we should continue more of these. Somebody has said that wall climbings with hand should be avoided in patients with weak supra and poor glenohumeral movements. So a patient who has a weak supra, obviously we should avoid more therapy to those patients. We need to focus on, or at least diagnose, why is the supra weak. So is there any sort of rotator cuff injury or not? If the patient is painful and an acute frozen shoulder, obviously the supra is going to be weak, and those patients will have difficulty in wall climbing. So we need to do some sort of stretching for the capsule. That's when these patients will improve. And that's what I want to focus on next is, what if this patient's progress becomes stagnant and he becomes tired that I'm not improving, my stiffness is not relieving? What are the options then? So in my situation, what I would prefer to treat my patients with is, first is, if they are very painful, I would want them, or I would advise them to take ultrasound guided US corticosteroid injection with a local anesthetic. That helps reduce the patient's inflammation, and once the pain is down within a week's time, then the patient is able to do physiotherapy better. And there are good research articles to say that physiotherapy done post steroid injections, the patient's are able to perform their exercises much better and faster. However, these patients also now we have an option for stiff frozen shoulders where we do an arthroscopic release of the capsule, and these patients improve dramatically. So the stiff phase, which can last for about a year's time, is cut down to almost less than a month. So most of my patients get their full range of motion with a capsular release after almost 2 weeks time, and active range of motion. They do need some work to strengthen their rotator cuff muscles, so that takes another 6 to 8 weeks. And by about 2 to 3 months time, post capsular release patient does improve and gains back his normal range of motion. So surgical intervention for me is only after they have passed through the conservative trial and they have not responded. For especially this patient, I've advised him the same thing: put him through some courses of medication, advised him exercises. If he doesn't improve, then maybe a corticosteroid injection, or his pain is not down. And if he feels that still my progress is stagnant and I need to get my range of motion fast, is when I would advise some arthroscopic uh, intervention. Which muscle relaxant? There are hosts of muscle relaxants in the market. Anyone is fine. Anyone containing thiazolzazone or chlorzoxazone is fine. Thiocolchicoside or chlorzoxazone, sorry, is fine. Uh,
There's a question put forth regarding how would you test supraspinatus in isolation?
Right. So supraspinatus in isolation always is tested by an empty can test or a Jobs test. Basically, it's inversion of the arm and putting weight. It needs to be in the scapular plane, so in the plane of the supraspinatus. And you ask the patient to lift up. You press down compared to the other side. If there is a weakness, then we know that there is some sort of could be a rotator cuff.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Can I interrupt you? So I just wanted to know many of these radicular pains, we advise a neuromodulator like pregabalin or gabapentin. So I wanted to know your opinions on which one do you prefer out of pregabalin and gabapentin, and at what dosages?
So both of them actually are of the from the same
We can't hear you very clearly, Priyank.
They are totally safe to take with the undesirable effect of causing growth is similar. Pregabalin is a little bit better than gabapentin. So if at all you have to start that, you should start with either 100 milligrams dose of gabapentin or a 50 milligrams dose of pregabalin, especially because you don't want these patients to start feeling drowsy and groggy, and some old patients might have falls at nights. So if they are very old, you start with gabapentin 100 milligrams, progress to 300 milligrams. Younger patients, you can start 50 milligrams pregabalin going to 75 and eventually to 150. But standard dosage is 300 for gabapentin and 75 for pregabalin. And they are totally safe to take.
Right. So
Thank
I
you.
have somebody has asked me a question: does hydrocortisone cause unhealthy healing in the supraspinatus muscle? So corticosteroid as such is an anti-inflammatory medication. Now, anti-inflammatory medications have gotten a bad name in terms of it can prevent healing of a torn or prevent healing of injured tissue, which depends really on the dosage. So I wouldn't want to generally say that a hydrocortisone injection will prevent healing of the supra muscle if torn. And in general, in patients who have a supraspinatus acute tear or even a partial tear, these patients are very painful if you've ever seen those patients. So in the initial phase, we always want to treat them conservatively. And my approach is the same, in which, if for 2 or 3 weeks, these patients have not improved with simpler medications and icing and any of those types of modalities, that's when I would offer a hydrocortisone ultrasound guided injection to get over that inflammatory phase for them. But I mean, in technically, if you see the instructions, it does affect a little bit of healing. So I wouldn't want to do them very early on. Maybe in the later uh, part of the progression, if the patient is still not improving, that's the only option we would have. So post arthroscopy rest for how long? So for if I'm doing an arthroscopy for purely stiff adhesive capsulitis, there is no rest. I don't put them in a sling. They start their physiotherapy or exercises immediately the next uh, uh, I mean the next day of the surgery or even the same day of surgery. Looking through scapular dyskinesia. So scapular dyskinesia is usually always secondary to rotator cuff or a capsular pathology. So if the glenohumeral joint is tight, then obviously at 90 degrees you are going to see forward movement of the scapula, and that itself is scapular dyskinesia. So scapular dyskinesia is usually always secondary to some sort of rotator cuff or capsular pathology, and unless and until, of course, it's primarily a long thoracic nerve injury where there is a serratus anterior loss and there is winging of the scapula, then that scapular dyskinesia is completely of a different cause. So we need, generally there is scapular dyskinesia has to be labeled as a symptom and not as a diagnosis. Okay, so I think I have answered most of the questions, and I think we should end this topic now because we've
Yeah.
exceeded our time quite a
Which
lot.
is and it's a never ending thing,
Yeah, it's
which
anyway.
is one of the reasons why I would really encourage everybody to join the get into the system and become a member, because we have our WhatsApp groups, and if we are not able to answer any questions over here, we can happily take those questions on WhatsApp, so you can keep putting it up over there and the discussion can continue, because here we really have short amount of time.
So next week we are planning to discuss anterior knee pain and if foot is the real culprit. So Abhishek, Kini, and I are just going to dwell on this very specific topic where a lot of focus is on the knee because of course the complaints at the knee, but we are forgetting that the foot and the ankle plays a very big role in this kind of a clinical picture. So we'll send the updates to everyone closer to the weekend, and we'll try and see you at the same time the following Sunday.
Yeah, thank you for joining, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you,
Bye
Chintan and
guys.
Priyank. Wonderful 1 hour.
Chalo, see you guys. Signing out.